Buenas tardes. Queridos amigos, me da mucho gusto saludarlos. Soy Silvia Gerson, como ustedes ya saben, soy actualmente la presidenta de la Asociación Mexicana de Amigos del Instituto Weizmann de Ciencias y me siento muy honrada en saludarlos, darles la bienvenida a este evento académico después de más de un año de pausa en el que la pandemia nos ha forzado al confinamiento y al aislamiento social. Si bien hemos tenido que cuidarnos y reducir las interacciones presenciales, las investigaciones del Instituto Weizmann en Ciencias no se han detenido. Continúan los desarrollos científicos, los científicos con sus protocolos, con eficiencia y mucha calidad. Agradezco la presencia de todos ustedes, en especial de nuestros ponentes, a quienes presentaremos en un momento, por acompañarnos esta noche. Las bondades del Zoom permiten compartir el conocimiento a distancia. Y gracias a ello, estamos ahora reunidos en este evento educativo desde México, Estados Unidos de Norteamérica e Israel, entre otras latitudes, en simultáneo. Todo esto gracias al desarrollo de la ciencia y la tecnología. Este evento académico tiene exclusivamente intenciones educativas e informativas, no promocionales. Los conferenciantes generosamente han ideado un formato de exposición de entrevista con el fin de facilitar nuestro aprendizaje, hacernos sentir cómodos, de tal manera que podamos enterarnos de los conceptos básicos relevantes de las criptomonedas, de su historia, usos y precauciones importantes respecto a este tipo de monedas virtuales, sin pretender ni la venta, ni siquiera recomendar su compra. Es una conferencia educativa. Hemos invitado a dos expertos financieros. El licenciado Samuel Sandler, amigo mío personal, a quien quiero mucho, y a la licenciada Monique Sinmao. Ambos accedieron de manera desinteresada y generosa a impartir esta plática para actualizarnos en este tema fascinante, complejo para los que no somos expertos en finanzas. El programa tendrá la duración de 3/4 de hora, 1 hora, en donde primero presentaremos a los ponentes, o se presentarán, más bien el licenciado Sandler es el que va a presentarse y va a presentar a Monique. Y entonces después harán una disertación en una forma muy agradable, en forma de entrevista. A lo largo de la entrevista les agradeceríamos mandaran por medio del chat sus inquietudes, sus preguntas, de tal manera que al terminar la plática podamos, puedan ellos más bien contestar a sus preguntas. Entonces, como es una plática que quisiera ya empezar, para no quitarles más tiempo a los ponentes, quiero nada más aclararles que la disertación va a ser básicamente en inglés, si bien el licenciado Sandler es bilingüe completamente, él hará ya hacia el final algunas intervenciones en español y darán respuestas a sus preguntas. Pues sin más que agregar a la plática y con muchos deseos de conocer y de disfrutar de esta plática, le pediría a Samuel Sandler si nos hace favor de presentarse y de presentar a Monique. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Silvia, y muchísimas gracias a todos los que nos acompañan esta tarde. Gracias a la Asociación Mexicana de Amigos del Instituto Weizmann y a los organizadores de este evento. Les agradecemos que hayan separado parte de su domingo para estar con nosotros y tratar este tema tan interesante acerca de las criptomonedas y la tecnología que hay detrás de las mismas. Permítanme presentarme. Mi nombre es Samuel Sandler, presidente de Sol Capital Management. Somos una empresa de asesores de inversión basados en la zona metropolitana de Washington, D.C. Tenemos ya más de 30 años ofreciendo nuestros servicios, principalmente atendiendo a familias y a instituciones de Latinoamérica, Estados Unidos y de otros países. Esta tarde me acompaña mi colega Monique Sin Mao, que es parte de nuestro comité de inversiones, además es administradora de portafolios y obviamente ha desarrollado un nivel de conocimiento muy importante en este tema y por lo mismo, cuando Silvia me hizo el favor de invitarme, le sugerí que creía que era muy importante manejarlo en inglés. Sabemos que es un tema complejo, pero trataremos de hacerlo lo más amigable posible, pero también me interesa muchísimo que hacia el final, cuando empiecen las preguntas, que por favor se sientan con la comodidad de hacer todas las preguntas que quieran. Para nosotros este evento es para el beneficio de ustedes y nos interesa que salgan favorecidos en cuanto al conocimiento de este tema tan interesante. Como lo dijo Silvia, creo que es importante recalcar que estamos aquí con el fin de informarles. La palabra educar es un poco fuerte, pero nuestra intención es que aprendan un poco acerca del tema, más no venimos a recomendar ni sugerir que inviertan en este rubro. Y durante la plática platicaremos un poco acerca de esos riesgos que mencionó Silvia, que es uno de los temas que vamos a tratar. Bueno, con esto me permito presentarles a mi colega Monique. Please go ahead. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate you taking your personal time to learn about something complex, but something that's also very interesting and very important for your personal wealth. So money as we know it has come a long way from the physical cash and the coins that we've interacted with throughout most of our lives as the economy has been progressively more digital. Our goal tonight is to strengthen your understanding of the digital economy, in particular, your understanding of how cryptocurrencies and digital assets play a role in that future of money. Let's begin. So allow me now to switch over to our presentation. This past year, we have seen a tremendous surge in headline news and social media covering digital assets. We've also seen for the first time a tremendous surge in the participation by institutional investors in cryptocurrencies. These are the whales, the large participants, insurance companies, hedge funds, investment managers, and even blue chip technology companies. On this slide here, you see a picture of Elon Musk, who you might recognize as the CEO of Tesla. And Tesla this past year announced that they purchased 250 million worth of Bitcoin for their corporate balance sheet. And what this begins to do is to normalize the idea of potentially including cryptocurrencies in a portfolio of corporate assets. These large numbers, as you can imagine, have really attracted the attention of financial media. So if you look across here, over the last 18 months, Bitcoin has increased in value by about 600%, reaching a peak in early April of about $63,000 per Bitcoin. And this is a 24-hour market. So if I look tonight, Bitcoin is trading at about $56,300 as we speak. Another event in April, Coinbase, which is a crypto exchange where investors go to buy and sell cryptocurrencies, it made a market debut in April at $85 billion market cap. And to give you some idea, this is larger than the combined market cap of NASDAQ and ICE, which is the owner of the New York Stock Exchange itself. Now, between cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, crypto exchanges like Coinbase, and even central bank digital currencies, you can see that digital assets is a very expansive topic. And what Sam and I would like to do tonight is present to you a primer to help you get the foundational pieces of what digital assets are. We've organized our conversation around 3 topics: technology, investment landscape, and also some other considerations.
So Monique, why don't you take us through the process and help us understand, let's go back to the basics. Where did cryptocurrency come from? How does they work, and what do they do for us?
Sure, Sam. Well, the first question, where does cryptocurrency come from, is a really important starting place. For many, it feels like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency came out of nowhere. And actually, Bitcoin has been around for 12 years, and it was easy to miss when it was launched because it occurred during the Great Financial Crisis. In October 2008, which is about a month after the Lehman Brothers collapse, a white paper was published online by an anonymous Satoshi Nakamoto introducing the concept of Bitcoin. The paper introduced a concept whereby a peer-to-peer cashless electronic cash system would come into existence where there is no physical cash and no intermediaries. It also introduced the idea of a scarce digital asset. Now, this is similar to the idea of scarce physical assets like gold and silver, but this was the first time introducing the idea of a digital version of a scarce asset. In all, only 21 million Bitcoin would ever be created, the last one being created in about 2140. Now, Bitcoin is often known as the first cryptocurrency. There were attempts before this, but the reason why Bitcoin is known as the first cryptocurrency is it's the first successful one. And the reason it's successful is it came at the right time. So a couple of months after the introduction of the concept online, the first Bitcoin was created in January 2009. And this time was really the peak of public distrust of the global financial system. Banks were receiving bailouts. Central banks were introducing some really radical new ways of managing monetary policy. The other thing that made it the right time is, for those of you who think about Bitcoin as being something very mysterious and difficult, think about how you interact with money today. By 2008, money had largely moved to being ledger money anyway, in a digital format. When we buy and sell goods from websites, when we transfer money by wire for businesses, most of money by this point in the digital economy was moving progressively online. And finally, blockchain, the technology underlying Bitcoin, really was able to come into its full strength and existence in 2008, following the series of technological breakthroughs in cryptography as well as in data management.
So Monique, you made reference to some milestones that the technology went through. What are some of the innovations that came out of that?
Sure, Sam. So I mentioned that blockchain builds upon some key breakthroughs. And the first area is really in cryptography. So prior to 1971, most of cryptography around the world has really been used for military applications. When in war times, we're looking to send and receive information in a secure, encrypted way. Now in 1971, it was the first major innovation in how we think about encryption. Prior to that time, the sender and the receiver both are able to forward and reverse engineer a message. After 1971, cryptography introduced a more secure way that involved multiple keys. In this regime, the sender and the receiver have two separate keys so that forward interpretation is easy, but reverse engineering a message is very difficult. So this significantly increased our ability to send secure messages. In 1987, the Merkle tree advanced our ability to chain and pass secure information of unlimited quantity over time. And finally, in 2008, blockchain combined all of this advancement in cryptography, the advancement in data management, and created this concept of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies.
So it seems like all of this had to take place in order for us to, I guess, go to the next question. So can you help us understand how a transaction takes place in the blockchain, please?
So this diagram here is a great starting point. It's a diagram of how a transaction gets onto a blockchain. It begins with a genesis block, and as the name implies, a genesis block is the first block. It's the first transaction or set of transactions. And once this set of transactions occurs, this event is transmitted across the entire blockchain to all participants. Next, all participants can participate in evaluating whether these transactions are valid or not. And the first participant that fully validates the block is rewarded in Bitcoin. Now, the process begins with the genesis block. The encryption that is used to attach a new block of transactions to that genesis block and extend the blockchain is called mining. And this is a good point to stop a bit and introduce a question that I think we've gotten from many of our investors and perhaps you in the audience have today, which is, well, is Bitcoin, is blockchain often used for illicit activities? And it's an important question to understand. And I wanted to begin answering that question here around technology in three ways. So the first way is we talked about how when an event occurs, that event's data is transmitted across to all participants. What this transparency means is that if you have a bad actor looking to tamper with a single transaction or a block of transactions, that slight shift in code will immediately become visible to all participants across the blockchain. Secondly, we talked about the genesis block and the hashing of an additional block and so forth to create the blockchain, such that at any point in time, the most current block contains this sequential history all the way back to the genesis block. So what this means is if a bad actor is caught out at the current time, they wouldn't be caught out just for that one activity. They would be caught out for every activity back 12 years. And the last point I'd make here is that from an evidential standpoint, I think the most important piece of information is that while we've heard about attacks on crypto exchanges, whereby accounts might be stolen or Bitcoin might be stolen, since the history of blockchain over the past 12 years, there has not been one event whereby Bitcoin itself or any of the cryptocurrencies have actually been hacked. So that's a very important piece of evidence right there.
All right, so can you dive a little deeper into how the Bitcoin is created, please?
Sure, so let's talk about how Bitcoin is created. And the most important point I would make here is that it takes a lot of computing power and a lot of electricity. So we talked about in the prior slide how the addition of blocks to extend the chain is called mining. Well, the difficulty level of mining controls the pace, and that pace is controlled by the system so that, again, only 21 million Bitcoin is ultimately created by about 2140. And every 4 years, that difficulty level is roughly doubled so that the production of Bitcoin at mining events gets roughly halved. And this event called the halvening event most recently occurred last year in 2020, such that presently the mining rate is about 6.25 new Bitcoin created every 10 minutes, or about 900 Bitcoin created per day. The pace at which it's being created, the amount of electricity that's consumed, it's presently estimated that each Bitcoin mined costs about $40,000 to produce. Now, from an economic standpoint, one way to look at that $40,000 figure is that it's the cost of production. The cost of production creates a basis for intrinsic value for the coin, because if the value of the coin isn't greater than the cost of production, the producers, the miners, have no incentive to continue the activity. Now, one of the criticisms is, well, that's an enormous amount of electricity. Well, for comparison, it costs about $1,200 to mine an ounce of gold, or about $40,000 to mine a kilogram of gold, which is about 1/12 of the block of gold that we often see in the press. So to give you an idea, it's about the same pace and value as extraction of 1 kilogram of gold. Now, for miners to be profitable, often these miners are located in regions where they have the advantage of lower cost electricity. And so as a result, we see a lot of the mining activity right now occurring in China and also in Latin America, such as in Argentina, where there's an advantage in the price of electricity and also in the availability of green sources of electricity for this activity. And I put in a data point here. It's about 70 terawatt hours of electricity per year. So it's about the amount of electricity of Ireland and Austria combined.
So can you give us an idea of what other crypto or digital currencies are out there, please?
This is a really important question. I think a lot of people recognize the brand of Bitcoin, but over the past 12 years, there are actually now 10,000 varieties of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. So any cryptocurrency that isn't Bitcoin is referred to as altcoin, alternative coin. One variety of altcoin is the stable coin. It's called a stable coin because the value of the coin is stabilized by an asset that is easy to value, such as being backed by real estate, backed by a bond, or backed by a basket of fiat currencies like US dollar and the euro. A third asset category is the digital asset itself, and you can think about this as programmable money. And it's really exciting because it forms the basis of decentralized finance, DeFi, such that you can even create a digital asset to represent a security such as a bond. The EIB, which is the EU's issuing bank, is talking right now about issuing a bond in a digital asset format, which includes the rights and obligations of investors, including the principal and interest being paid out, with very little interaction on the part of the owner. So the blockchain concept is foundational across altcoin, stablecoin, digital assets. But what is different is that the system for evaluating the amount of intensity that's involved to validate transactions, it varies across the definition of each of these systems. And what I would add here is that when you look at what we've seen so far, the blockchain itself, how it creates a record of all transactions in a way that's difficult to tamper with, you can see that it has applications beyond financial uses. It has issues and uses in non-financial cases. And here's an example from IBM's blockchain, which is called the Hyperledger. They've used this blockchain backbone for a lot of other non-financial uses, including for logistics, which is the transfer of goods and services, perhaps with sensitivities along the way. It's been used for organ donations, for matching and allocating donations of organs throughout the system. And it's also been used for real estate transfers where two parties might look to transfer the title and ownership of a piece of real estate in a transaction. So many, many uses outside of the financial spectrum.
So after having all that very interesting background, Monique, please share with us your knowledge about the investment landscape. If any of us here in the audience are interested in investing, how can we do that? Where can I go and buy and use cryptocurrencies? And who are the main users of this new digital currency?
You're right, Sam. This past year, we've really seen a lot of questions like this from our own clients as well. It's really been a wake-up call to the digital economy. It's been a wake-up call to digital money in general. And we talked about how there are 10,000 varieties. So it's helpful with so many choices to create some constructs, some categories for thinking about the different categories. So we like to think about it in terms of the sponsor of the cash system, as well as the main use of that cash. So one of the categories is central bank digital currency, sponsored by the central bank. And in the commercial categories, we have those that are primarily existing to perform a function, the utility crypto asset. And then the third category, which is a store of value, the ones that are really about the value of the coin itself and not to perform a function.
So can you help us understand the difference between the decentralized and centralized systems when it comes to this type of currency, please?
Sure, and the most important centralized system is the central bank digital currency. And it is a pretty important innovation. A survey by BIS indicated that 80% of the global central banks are contemplating or at least studying some form of central bank digital currency. And I'm going to read a quote here from the IMF itself. The underlying technology used to create digital currency provides government an opportunity to improve and reboot the global monetary system, possibly to create a new consensus digital global reserve currency. So this is similar to the special drawing rights that the IMF creates. Now, if it sounds futuristic, what I would point out is that it's not, it's here. And the second largest global economy, China, during 2020, when the entire world was really focused on health, China thought it was important enough to continue with its planned testing of the digital yuan with the goal of releasing it for use in time for the Beijing Olympics. And one thing important that Sam pointed out is the central bank digital currency is a centralized form of digital currency, meaning that the primary operator who controls inventory and use remains the central bank as it does for fiat systems.
So after all the press that we've had during the last, I would say, year and whatever we've gone through this first quarter and a month, we hear a lot of noise about digital currencies. Can you give us an idea of the size of the market, please?
Well, before we get to the size of the market, I wanted to just spend a little time on the commercial digital assets. So there were two categories outside of the central bank, and I think this is the market that you're looking to have a size on. So one of them is the utility token, where value is created in the token, but really the purpose of the token is to perform a function. So a good example of that is American Express. Many of us have and use it. And if we're looking to send money from point A to point B with American Express, you already are using cryptocurrency because Amex has been rolling out XRP, which is a digital currency from Ripple, to send cash from point A to point B in shorter amount of time and for less cost. Now, in contrast, if we're sending money from point A to point B via the banking system, it might take 2 days with a very sizable commission. The other category is the store of value, which includes Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the stable coins that are easier to spend because they have a stable value. I think this is the market that a lot of investors focus on when they think about your question about market cap and size. So to give you an idea, this chart here is a capture of the market cap of how big is the crypto market, which is what you were asking. So Bitcoin today is about 1 trillion in market cap. And this is equivalent to 4 of the largest companies, JP Morgan, ExxonMobil, Nike, and IBM together. Now, if you look at Bitcoin and all cryptocurrencies, that market cap is about 2 trillion, which is equal to one of the largest companies we know today, which is Apple. And this number, to give you some context, it's small in comparison to the S&P 500, which is about 35 trillion market cap. So from 2 trillion to 35, you can see there's a long way for this market to grow and mature before it gets near the market cap of the total common stock exchange. Now, on the other hand, it is large in the context of the GDP of Mexico, for instance, which is about 1 trillion per year. Just the Bitcoin portion of the market is the same size.
So help us understand, who are the participants or the ones who invest in this type of currencies, please?
That is a great question. This slide here gives us the best guess of where some of these participants come from. So as of today, there are 18.6 million total Bitcoins in circulation. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, this past year, we've seen a real acceleration in the participation of institutional money, whether it's companies like Tesla and PayPal and MicroStrategy, or the participation of investment funds like a Galaxy Digital or Grayscale. So about 7% of all Bitcoin are owned by these large corporates and investment funds. It's estimated that about 5% is owned by the mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto. And another 80% or so are owned by the top 2 or 3 private holders. And our best understanding of these top 2 or 3% is they include folks like the Winklevoss brothers, who owned 700,000, which today is worth about 35 billion of Bitcoin alone. There are the CEOs and founders of various exchanges, such as Bitmain, Ripple, who own quite a large stake in this. And Draper, who is one of the leading venture capitalists, is estimated to own about 2 billion worth of Bitcoin alone. So that's about 80%. And it leaves 1 million only of Bitcoin that is the domain of the retail investors. And while that 1 million is small in totality, I'd call your attention to the box here to better understand what a Bitcoin means to the retail investor. Well, 1 Bitcoin is actually subdivided in the same way that $1 is subdivided into 100 cents. 1 Bitcoin is equal to 100 million units called Satoshis. So in actuality, those 1 million of Bitcoin is 100 trillion Satoshis. So it's atomized into very small increments, and that allows the retail investor in large scale to participate. So when one buys a Bitcoin, one doesn't need to buy an entire Bitcoin, but say a Bitcoin is worth $50,000. I want to buy some Bitcoin, but I want to take my time. So if I want to purchase $1,000 worth, I'm actually purchasing 0.02 of a Bitcoin, which is about 2 million Satoshi. Now, there are about 100 million unique addresses registered with Bitcoin, but really the active accounts that have $1 or more of Bitcoin really number around 20 to 30 million. So to give you an idea, then, if you divide that, most retail investors maybe have about $1,000 worth. But again, the concentrated holding is among these whales.
So after having gone through the history where the Bitcoin came from and the investment landscape, what are the considerations that we should take into account before we go ahead and start investing? Would you mind sharing that with us, Monique?
Sure, Sam. What's most important for any investment, which Bitcoin and cryptocurrency certainly are, is to always take a balanced view around the benefits as well as the potential risks. And throughout our presentation today, we've talked about a number of the benefits. So one, it's very efficient, as we saw in the case of American Express's usage of the XRP token. It's very transparent. We saw that in the image of the blockchain and how transaction is transmitted across the entire open network. We've seen that it's accessible. Anyone can participate in the validation, which really makes it a very democratic financial system. And lastly, with digital assets, we talked about how digital assets are programmable money, which gives us a lot of flexibility to create instruments that have some features in it that reduce the legal process that a lot of securities now entail. On the flip side, in terms of risks, let's talk about the ability to spend. So we talked about the crypto exchanges being places where you can go on board to buy and sell cryptocurrencies. But depending upon the regulations in a particular domicile, you might not actually be able to transfer it where transferring the Bitcoin allows you to spend it. So in places like Hong Kong, Switzerland, and the UK, as well as in Mexico, you're able to pretty easily spend Bitcoin and transfer it between parties. But in the United States, the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, has taken a slower approach. And in the US, spending Bitcoin is actually pretty difficult to do. So on the point of regulation, one thing I would highlight is, besides the ability to spend, is the regime and the openness to the cryptocurrency and digital asset field. In contrast to the SEC, which is taking the go slow approach, in Mexico has really been welcoming and at the forefront of technology since about 2018, when they basically designated the Mexican Central Bank as an oversight authority over the rollout of this technology. So depending upon your particular domicile, definitely pay attention to what the regulations are there, not just to spending, not just to the ability to buy and sell, but also to the tax regime in those areas. As with any digital currency, another risk always is cyber theft, malfunctions, and outages. Please select a crypto exchange that is more secure. Some have commercial insurance to actually help protect your positions, something important to think about. And finally, one of the major risks that I would point out is that the coexistence and competition of commercial cryptocurrencies, it's something that we still have to evaluate in the context of central bank digital currencies. Right now, it's only China, which is about 20% of the global economy, looking to put out this digital yuan this year. But other central banks may make the same move. And at that point, what will be the regime? Will they continue to allow Bitcoin, or will they make it more restrictive relative to the central bank digital currency?
So now that we have a better understanding of the potential benefits and the risks, again, if I'm interested in going and invest in cryptocurrencies, what are the access points to be able to purchase them?
So in terms of access points, and also in terms of the ways to get some investment exposure, this slide here provides a good summary of that. So one of the ways is to directly buy and hold cryptocurrencies. So we've talked about a number of crypto exchanges. PayPal, for instance, has 340 million global subscribers. US subscribers are currently able to go onto PayPal and purchase and sell Bitcoin. The rest of the PayPal subscriber base, the global base, we're expecting Q2 2021 for PayPal to provide this capability. Coinbase, which we began by talking about their market debut in April, it's one of the larger crypto exchanges, and that's another site where investors can go on and buy Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. In the Mexican market, for instance, the cost is about 0.5% of commissions plus about a 4% surcharge. The benefit of someone like a Coinbase is that they do have commercial insurance for their positions, which is probably why they price a little bit higher and pass that along to consumers. In the Mexican market, it's actually a lot easier to purchase Bitcoin than most other markets. You can purchase it on Bitso, where it's about 1% transaction fee, which goes down the more Bitcoin that you buy for volume discounts. You can also walk into an OXXO. OXXO is interesting in that there are many locations. It also provides financial transfer services. So even if I'm visiting Mexico and I have some leftover pesos, if I have an account with OXXO, I can take that and deposit the pesos into an account in Bitcoin. And finally, Fidelity Digital Assets, which is one of the largest global custodians, they provide an offering for higher net worth families who are perhaps looking to spend $250,000 or more on a Bitcoin position. The benefit of Fidelity Digital Assets is they also have the commercial insurance like Coinbase does. Additionally, they have partners like BlockFi, whereby if you do own a large amount of Bitcoin and want to lend it out and earn a spread, Fidelity Digital Assets has that capability as well. Now, some of the indirect ways to get involved: I don't want to buy Bitcoin directly, I don't want to hold it. There are private funds that where a manager is responsible for selecting how much Bitcoin, how much Ether, how much Lumen. They form the fund for you. It is a bit pricey, so definitely spend some time looking at the cost of management. In the US, there are fewer access points on the indirect fund basis because the SEC is slow to approve some of them. But in Canada, for instance, there is a Bitcoin fund that is available on the Canadian ETF. And then lastly, a very indirect way to invest is, I'm not sure about Bitcoin itself. It looks pretty volatile, but I'm really keen on blockchain as a technology. There are some ETFs like the Amplified Transformational Data ETF, BLOK, where an investor can just participate in the portion of technology for other non-financial uses and not be exposed to the volatility of directly exposing to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies itself. So a number of different access points and themes for getting in some investment exposure here.
So as we're getting near to the end of our presentation, Monique, would you mind summarizing or give us some highlights of what an investor should consider before venturing into the cryptocurrencies, please?
So in summary, we put together a list of key considerations before investing, and it's 4 categories just to keep it simple. Suitability, we talked about the volatility. It's a new asset, expect it to be more volatile. So you have to have the ability to withstand significant movements in valuation on a day-to-day basis. You also have to be able to withstand loss of capital, as with any investment. Now, storage is also another consideration. It's a digital asset. Many of the crypto exchanges like Coinbase and PayPal will store the private key and the Bitcoin or the Ether for you. But you can also create a digital wallet that allows you to store your private key yourself. You can also get an instrument that allows you to store it on something that looks very similar to a flash drive, but it would be your obligation and responsibility to keep it safe and not lose it. Regulations, we talked about, can I buy Bitcoin at all? Can I own it? Can I spend it? And tax regulations. So in different areas, Bitcoin is taxable. In Mexico, it's taxable. In the US, it's taxable as well. In other regions like Hong Kong, it's taxable for corporations, but not for retail investors. So it varies quite a bit, so spend some time getting to know the regulations. And finally, costs. We talked about the cost of the exchanges being quite different between someone like a Coinbase and a Bitso, but there's also the cost of storage. And additionally, there is the cost of taxation and so forth. So do spend some time on these factors. Again, suitability, storage, regulations, and also on the costs.
Well, thank you very much, Monique. This has been a great explanation and presentation. I'm going to switch now to Spanish. Muchísimas gracias a todos por haber escuchado esta presentación de parte de mi colega Monique. Sabemos que, como lo dije al principio, es un tema algo técnico, complejo, pero ahorita creo que es una buena oportunidad para atender cualquier inquietud, duda que tengan. Vi que en el chat entraron unas preguntas que... A ver, un segundito. Creo, o sea, en el momento que entró la pregunta de what is blockchain, porque la vi, era precisamente un momento antes de que Mónica explicara esa parte de la composición del blockchain. So, espero que eso haya sido de alguna manera atendida. También por WhatsApp he recibido algunas preguntas que me gustaría, las voy a plantear en español y se las voy a traducir a Monique. Una de las preguntas que me llegó me dice, ¿cómo puedo guardar mi llave o qué pasa si la pierdo? And I think you already covered this a little bit, Monique. This has to do with the safety of the wallet and, you know, or the security of the key whenever somebody purchases. Would you mind diving a little bit more into that, please?
Yeah, so this is a really important question. There are two ways to store your cryptocurrency. One way is digitally on the cloud, and this is often referred to as hot storage. And then cold storage is when you store it on a removable device. The two ways of storing it provide a trade-off in terms of the level of security. So one reason to put it on a portable device is to take it off of the cloud and also to own the key to the coin directly. The drawback of that is it's quite small. You could lose it. You can lose your private key. You might have written it down. Someone can take it. So the trade-off of owning it on a hot and cold device also matters quite a bit. Now, on the hot storage, there are a number of ways to get exposure to reduce some of the risk of theft or losing the Bitcoin device. So one of the ways, of course, is if you're working with a PayPal, for instance, which hopefully they'll roll it out to the Mexico market this second quarter of this year. When PayPal transactions take place, PayPal will store it for you. But the trade-off there is when PayPal stores it for you, they store your private key. And for the purists out there, if PayPal owns the private key, you don't actually own it. Now, another way for hot storage, which again is the cloud storage, is to participate via a private fund that invests in Bitcoin or a basket of such currencies. In that case, that fund, their treasury system, their corporate system is responsible for the safeguarding of your instrument. And so you have the exposures, you have the economic benefit, but you don't have the risk of being responsible for the safeguarding. And those firms typically have insurance now to cover it. And to give you an idea, 5 years ago, commercial insurers would not cover the value of Bitcoin, of theft, of fraud, or anything like that. And that's something that almost all of the funds now roll out, and even the crypto exchanges. So again, some trade-offs between hot and cold storage there, Sam, in terms of security.
Thank you, Monique. The next question that I have has to do with, on one of your graphs, you show the Bitcoin reaching a pretty high level. And one of the members of the audience is asking, would it still be attractive at this level to get in and invest in Bitcoin? Would you mind elaborating on that, please?
Sure. So one of the fundamental concepts of Bitcoin is that it's been rolled out as a scarce digital asset. And if you think about it in terms of the scarcity of metals like gold, the less that becomes available, the higher the price tends to be, just because of the scarcity and of course the supply and demand. So remember also in the case of Bitcoin, not only is there a final inventory of 21 million Bitcoin, but every 4 years, the pace at which Bitcoin is produced is cut in half. So presently 900 Bitcoin are produced per day, but in 2024, only 450 Bitcoin will be produced per day. Now, if you ladder that an initial slide in terms of what might support the value of Bitcoin and the scarcity of Bitcoin, you ladder on that you have now 7% of Bitcoin owned by the whales who make large purchases at a time. So I did the math, for instance, on the rollout of 340 million subscribers to PayPal. If everybody bought just a little bit, it would take about 9 months for every subscriber on Bitcoin on PayPal to have just a little bit of Bitcoin. So the supply-demand asymmetry is also there. And then lastly, if you think about how miners operate, in order for miners to participate in this space, they need to see that the value goes up. As the value goes up, more miners get involved. As more miners get involved, the cost of mining starts to go up. And for the cost of mining to go up, the Bitcoin that is issued in reward has to continue to rise in order to offset and make it profitable to mine at all. So there's some factors that put a floor that help to accelerate the rise in the value of the coin. But as we saw earlier, when I was checking on the value of Bitcoin this weekend versus where it was in early April, it does fall back as well. So it hit a peak of 63,000 at the beginning of April. It's sitting now at 56,400. So it does pull back a bit too in periods where the market is digesting the prices. It moves around a bit too with respect to what the stock market is doing. So it doesn't always only go up, but the long-term trajectory, there are a number of factors that is tending to drive it higher at this point.
Monique, I see on the chat one person in the audience saying one guy in Turkey stole all of his customers' Bitcoins. What kind of insurance is available for that? And also, could that happen to platforms like Visa or any other, call it Coinbase or?
Sure, and this is really important. When you're selecting the crypto exchange or partner to interact and transact, you really need to spend some time on due diligence to make sure that it's an entity that either has a commercial license of some sort or has gone that extra mile to get some sort of a regulatory approval. So part of the reason why I would tend to focus on the branded names, the Coinbases, the PayPals, and the Fidelities, is because they're larger players. They have large parent companies who don't want the distraction of entering a space where there is a fraudulent activity. Also, they're larger players that have the deep pockets who can negotiate insurance coverage. And lastly, they're players that themselves are highly regulated, so they tend to go that extra mile to get the licenses. So Coinbase has a license from the New York Department of Federal Services, for instance, which is an extra. And some of the traders that they work with also can go that next step of getting licenses for being an alternative trading system. On the opposite, with a Bitso, they do work with Mexican regulators. OXXO has some partners on the bank side, even though they are a non-financial service participant in money transfers. They do have partnerships with Citibanamex, with Santander. So they also have to be wary about playing within the right side of the market. Now, if you think about places like Turkey, where there might be some smaller exchanges operating, in China there were, but there aren't that many exchanges there at this point. You have to pay attention to the size of the players, how deep their pockets are, and that's why it's worth spending a little bit more on transaction costs to get some of those protections.
Thank you, Monique. Somebody else in the audience asked if we foresee that eventually digital currencies might replace the fiat, money, regular money like dollars, euros. Could that happen in the future?
So this is a really big question about the transformation of money, but also the transformation of our privacy. So part of the motivation of central bank digital currency for someone like China, which is a pretty controlling economy, is to give them visibility on, say the top 10 real estate developers who are all multi-billionaires. They're always eager to take some of their personal wealth and put it overseas. So having a digital currency enables China to see the flow of money out of the country as well as into the country. But if we have 80% of the central banks also exploring the use of it, you can see that there are other motivations. So one of the key ones is the de-dollarization of the future of the economy. Right now, the global economy is highly dependent on the dollar, the value of the dollar, and its movements. And over the past 3 to 5 years, Russia and China in particular are eager to de-dollarize, particularly petrodollars, for their own purchases and sales. There's also the idea of sanctions. A lot of sanctions are done through the interbank system that was set forth by the United States in the 1950s called the SWIFT system. And the idea of having a central bank digital currency allows other regimes, like China, for instance, is looking into it. Germany would also love to see an alternative to the SWIFT system. So all of these ideas about central bank digital currency are really, really quite transformational. And I wouldn't be surprised to see 1 or 2 more of maybe the EU economies take a first step to roll out some pilot test of a central bank digital currency. But you can see there's a lot of motivation there from the perspective of the global economy and rebalancing some of that power, mostly away from the United States.
Thank you again, Monique. One question that came up, as people are considering investing in Bitcoins or as part of their portfolio, is there like a percentage that you would suggest would make sense for an asset class that is still relatively new and it has some volatility? What would be your perspective on that?
Sure, Sam. So this is a great question. With any new asset, there's more volatility because there needs to be more time for price discovery between buyers and sellers. So for more volatile asset classes, I might liken it to, in the energy industry, the oil and gas explorers, which is the more volatile piece even of the energy market. So whenever you have a highly volatile asset, something that's pretty new, we'd probably look at something like 2% of exposure within a portfolio, but definitely no more than 4%. And the 4% would really be for someone, we talked about suitability, it would really be for someone who can afford to risk more of their assets because they start from a higher position of wealth. So that's kind of the range that I would look at, Sam.
Thank you, Monique. Silvia, quiero ser respetuoso del tiempo de la audiencia. Por favor, no sé si haya más preguntas o si quieres, tienes algo que quieras que aclaremos. Nuevamente, esta es la tarde de ustedes y queremos que logren obtener el beneficio que pudieran tener de esto.
Yo quiero primero que nada agradecerles esta plática tan interesante. La verdad es que tenemos que prepararnos para el futuro. Esto parece ser que es algo que, aunque ya empezó hace 12 años, pues es un tema que iremos escuchando cada vez más. Me están pidiendo tus datos para que se puedan comunicar contigo. Quizá valga la pena que lo digas al aire.
Sí, lo que pensaba hacer, Silvia, si quieres, les pensaba mandar una copia de la presentación con toda.
Me parece muy bien.
La puedes distribuir, ahí vienen nuestros correos electrónicos y nuestros teléfonos directos. Entonces, con muchísimo gusto podemos continuar esta plática con las personas que quieran, les interese ahondar un poco en el tema. Estamos con mucho gusto disponibles. Pero yo te hago llegar por correo la presentación y con toda confianza la puedes distribuir.
Yo creo que para muchos de nosotros que tenemos muy poca información, Es mucho el contenido, realmente yo pensé que era algo mucho más breve en cuestión de que realmente tienes que estudiar para poder invertir en esto. Qué bueno que empezamos a comprenderlo. En realidad veo que el futuro va para allá y que la cuestión de la regulación es muy importante, porque yo tenía entendido que eran monedas muy poco reguladas, pero veo que no. Y creo que esto es algo como, es un campo en el que todos poco a poco podemos y tendremos que ir incursionando. Realmente sí quisiera agradecerle. I want to thank Monique and you, Sam, for your time and for the very, very important talk and very explicit way that you showed us what about this new type of currency and investment. So thank you very, very much. And estaremos en contacto. We'll be in touch with more questions and more other opportunities of interchange. And on behalf of the Asociación Mexicana de Amigos del Instituto Weitzman, we thank you both very, very much. It was a pleasure hearing you. I have to digest a lot of this information because that's not my field. I'm a psychologist and I'm a therapist. So for me, all these things are very important, and I know I have to get more into it. So thank you very much. I see you're here. We have your email, so thank you very much. I saw it, Sam. So.
And I'll send you, and if you want me, I can put it on the chat, but I know once you turn, yo sé que una vez que se apaga, se pierde esa información, pero yo con mucho gusto te hago llegar mis datos y con los de Monique y para que los compartan con toda confianza.
Y claro.
Y lo que necesiten, estamos a sus órdenes. Nuevamente, estamos conscientes de que este es un tema complejo, técnico, y créanme que pensamos en muchas maneras de cómo podíamos en un momento dado hacerlo más ligero, pero es la naturaleza del tema y por lo mismo estamos más que dispuestos a platicar y seguir un diálogo con las personas que les interese conocer más acerca de esto.
Por supuesto, les agradecemos muchísimo. Realmente es un tema fascinante que daría para horas y horas y horas de intercambio. Yo creo que la audiencia misma tiene que digerirlo más y seguramente les irán preguntando cosas a distancia, ¿no? Y muchísimas gracias.
Y gracias nuevamente a la Asociación Mexicana de Weitzman, del Instituto Weitzman, y mucha suerte y estamos a sus órdenes.
It was an honor to hear you both and to be here in this talk. And I don't know if you do this or not, but it's extraordinary. We have to really start working and understanding many of the risks and the benefits so we can make a very good choice. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Al contrario, que tengan una bonita noche y gracias a
Igualmente.
todos los que nos hicieron el favor de acompañarnos.
Muchas gracias a todos. Y ya que el licenciado Sandler nos va a hacer llegar la ponencia en inglés, yo creo que en una semana ya la tendremos ahí en las oficinas del Weitzman de México, ¿no? Para que la puedan ustedes solicitar o se las podamos escanear y enviar.
Claro que sí, se las voy a mandar en archivo digital que la pueden mandar por correo y
Perfecto.
tienen la libertad de mandársela a quien gusten.
Monique, thank you again, and we hope you come
so
to
much.
Mexico and we'll get the time to meet you in person and ask you other things. Thank you very much.
I'd enjoy that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
I see there Rahmiel also.
Yes, he's there. He's there.
Yes, I saw him. And también veo a muchos de nuestros amigos de la asociación. Les mando un cariñoso saludo. Espero que esta plática les haya inoculado la curiosidad para investigar un poquito más sobre las criptomonedas y ver si este es un tipo de inversión que les conviene o no, pero pues ahí tenemos un nuevo tema que explorar. Muchísimas gracias a todos y nos vemos la próxima.
Claro que sí, gracias. Buenas
Ok.
noches.
Buenas noches.